Let's continue to explore the whole area of risk management in this project environment. In the previous tutorial, I looked at some of the challenges of risk management in the project world. In this tutorial, I'm going to introduce you to this simple yet very powerful model of risk. What we have found out through conversations literally over decades and many hundreds of project managers is that we can isolate a common set of risk factors that exist in any project, whether that project is a business or an IT project. The risk factors are the same. What's different is the level of the risk and how you're going to mitigate it. This is where the difference between projects becomes paramount. To set the model up, we need to establish also, going back to our whole of life model, which we talked about in series 3 and throughout the series. The whole of life, of course, is development, benefit realization, support. There are 3 different risk models that apply. There is a project or development risk model. There is a production support model, which looks at what you're putting into production and the associated risks for people who have to actually operate that particular system or product you produced. Then, of course, there's our benefit realization risk. I'm going to focus in this tutorial around the project or development risks set, but we have information available to you through 7 Consulting, and we'll give you those details for both the benefit and production support risk models as well. In the project world, what we've isolated is there are 3 broad categories of risk in any project. And there's the risk of the product or system, the inherent risk of what you're building. And this looks at things like, is it innovative? What's the technological level of innovation in doing it? Things such as the size of the project, the size of the product, or the size of the system you're building is a huge risk factor. The stability of requirements and so on. And as I said, we articulate those in the models which we have for you. The second category of risk in any project is the risks associated with the team. This looks at things like the experience of the team, the experience of the project manager. Obviously, the more experienced the team, the lower the risk. You get how this works. It looks at things such as the length of the project. The longer the project exists over time, the more likely the team is going to experience turnover and those sorts of factors. We look at things such as the team work environment. Is it co-located or not co-located? What's the technology available and other support available to the team? These are the sort of factors which the team category looks at in a project risk life cycle. Then we've got the target or stakeholder environment. And this is an area that many people understand intuitively. How many stakeholders do you have to coordinate with? The more that you've got to work with, obviously the higher the risk. How engaged is the sponsor? How experienced is the sponsor is another set of factors. What's the degree of organizational impact that you're delivering is going to have? So we've got these 3 broad categories of risk: system or product, team, and then target or stakeholder environment. And that then gives you a really common, simplified approach to making sure that risk assessment is done consistently on each project. This is another challenge which I didn't talk about in the previous video. The real problem is that the risks are standard. The impact of the risks vary. The benefit realization risk simply looks at, and we're going back to the earlier tutorials, how long is it going to take for the outputs, remember, that we produce as deliverables, if you like, for those outputs to be converted to the outcome. A simple example, as I mentioned earlier, you decommission desktops. There's no other choice than for people to use the new desktop. The links are very short. Ipso facto, the risk of realizing the benefit of having a standardized, up-to-date operating environment for our people is a lot lower than if you're building a new banking product that has to be distributed through 1,000 branches with 1,000 people being trained how to sell it, etc., etc. Other things that we look at in the benefit risk model is things like the size of the prize. Clearly, the higher the amount of money, the more likely people are going to be focused on making it happen and achieving it. Looks at things like the continuity of sponsors, the number of people who've got to change work practices to actually realise benefits and so on. And again, when you see these standard risk models, you'll understand all of them. The support risk model looks at things such as how large is the system in terms of support? How many people are going to be needed to require? Does it have to be up 24/7 is another example of a risk in a production environment. Do you have teams that are really good at support versus development? Because they do require different skills. How many active users are you going to have on that system? So there's sort of risk factors. In an ideal world, right up front in your early conversations with the sponsor, you start introducing the sponsor to these three different areas of risk. The risks of building something, the risk of realizing the benefits, and the risks of keeping it going. And this starts getting the sponsor around the idea that up front, we can start looking at risk in a constructive, positive way, as I mentioned in the last tutorial. In terms of the risk management process itself, it's pretty standard. Assess the risks, mitigate them where you can, constantly monitor and track the risks, report the risks. Is that okay? Keep reporting them, right? And any new risks, or if you want to use that term, issues that emerge, add them to your risk model. So risk becomes this dynamic process throughout the project. We get all obsessed about things such as scope change. What if you started a project that you assessed overall as low risk, and then factors emerge that means it's now a high risk project? As you're going to see in the next tutorial, the same project assessed as low risk is fundamentally different to the same project assessed as high risk. So to summarize, you've got development or delivery risks, production support risk, and benefit risk. And the proactive identification of the risks before you start the project and the proactive mitigation of those risks is a perfect example of win-win. If you reduce the risks of a project before you start it, everybody wins. Sponsor wins, you win, the team wins, the stakeholders win. I cannot think of a more powerful argument for having a standardized model that actually is used to proactively get on top of risks rather than reactively.